Hello and welcome to Agenda 2030. It's been 25 years since 189 countries adopted the Beijing Declaration, where the interest of women and their welfare is to be protected and upheld. 25 years after, Nigeria and indeed the other communities in the world are celebrating International Women's Day, which has now been expanded to International Women's Month. And on this episode of Agenda 2030, I'll be speaking with the UN Women representatives to Nigeria and ECOWAS. And she'll be talking to us about what the UN system is doing to ensure that the interest of women is protected and their rights are always guaranteed. Do stay with us.
Agenda 2030. As a successor framework for the Millennium Development Goals, the global community rolled out a bigger, deeper, and more encompassing framework called the Sustainable Development Goals, designed to transform our world, lift the poor out of poverty, as well as ensure inclusive and healthy society. On Agenda 2030, we take you on a media trip to the global destination of the future we want. With everyone on board, we focus on the people and their struggle, the civil society and their agitations, the government and her development effort, the Global Development Agenda, its 17 goals and 169 targets. We bring you all the deliberations, insightful conversations, and high-level partnerships on the road to global destination. Agenda 2030, showing on this channel. Agenda 2030, leaving no one behind.
You're welcome to the program, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. How's it been the whole week of celebrating the Women's Day? Some men are already getting jealous, talking about they should also have their Men's Day.
Well,
So
actually, we have expanded it to a month. So it's actually the full month of March.
Wow.
Because there's so much that women have to say, want to celebrate, want to highlight, and it's difficult to fit it in a day. So it's a month of activities. It started off very well. We started the month at the end of February with a press conference which was convened by the Honorable Minister of Women's Affairs to basically introduce the theme of this year, which is Generation Equality, Realizing Women's Rights. As you know, this year is also a very important year on the Global Women's Calendar, because it is 25 years since the world converged in Beijing, China, to adopt what we still consider as one of the most important blueprints for women's rights, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. And this year it's 25 years since that was adopted. And so the celebration for International Women's Day and Month is really to look at how far we've come, what more we need to do, and who we need to bring on board. And the emphasis is on young women this time around. We recognize that the voice and leadership of young women should drive the work on women's rights and gender equality going forward. So we are putting a strong emphasis on the role and leadership of young women also this year.
Yeah, we talk so much about gender equality, talking about generation equality, gender parity, and so much about it. What exactly are the issues at stake here?
The issue at stake is development. As far as we at UN Women are concerned, we're really talking about the development of our communities, of our countries. And we believe, and we have evidence to show, the countries that actually invest in the education of girls, invest in the empowerment of women and their full contribution to societies are actually the healthiest societies, societies where, which meet the development targets that we are trying to meet. We have our SDGs, and we recognize that, you can't develop a country when half of the productive resources of the human capital resources remain underdeveloped. And so when we talk about gender equality, we're not just talking about it for the sake of it. We're talking about it because our countries, our development, our survival depends on it. And we are so far behind in terms of what we need to do to lift our countries out of poverty. to bring equality in terms of the voices of women in decision making. So when we talk about bringing women into the space of development of politics, it is because we want to improve the overall health, wealth, and well-being of the people of our countries. And that is what underlines this. And we also have an obligation, because all our governments have committed to respect the rights of women equally. You know, in Beijing, one of the big mottos of Beijing was women's rights are human rights. That it was in Beijing, China, that we actually, for once and for all, recognized that when we talk about women's rights, we are talking about human rights, which is the bedrock of the UN Charter, to which all our countries, Nigeria included, have signed on to. So essentially, we're talking about development, we're talking about progress, we're talking about peace for all citizens of our countries. And in Nigeria, we do have to, with the size of the country that it is, we cannot afford to leave anyone behind. We're a population of 100 million women. Imagine what 100 million empowered women can do to turn around the fortunes of this country. So it's not an option, and it's not a favor to women. It's a responsibility, and it's a necessity for all our governments to actually invest in this.
Yeah, you talk about the Benji declaration. I think one of the fallouts of that declaration was the 35% affirmative action, I want to believe.
Okay, so Beijing actually, what the Beijing conference noted was that in order to have a critical mass, emphasis on a critical mass of women in any decision-making space, because evidence has also shown that, you know, until and unless you have a critical mass of anyone, whether it's young people or women or even men, in a context where the women are the majority, your voices and your perspectives may not influence decisions that much. So Beijing highlighted 30% as the minimum to ensure a critical mass. So that 30% is not even the ultimate. The ultimate is 50%.
Okay.
And that, since Beijing, since that time, 25 years ago, the African Union has actually adopted in the Solemn Declaration on Gender a 50% participation for all member states. Nigeria was very active in those negotiations that led to the African Union to adopt that. So 50% is what we aim for, and that is what we should strive for. Beijing just noted that 30% is where you need to have a critical mass of women in decision making. But I must say that in doing the analysis 25 years later, globally, we're still around 24% of women in decision making. In parliaments, you know, women make up only about 24% of parliaments around the world. There are certain parliaments that have exceeded that have exceeded 50%, like Rwanda. It's great to know that the country that has the highest number of women in parliament is an African one, and it's Rwanda. Countries like Senegal also have done very well, almost 50%, and so on. But generally, it's 24% on average. But as we all know, in Africa, sadly, very sadly, Nigeria has the lowest, which is under 5%. So
globally or in Africa?
In Africa, but that doesn't help us globally either. So it means that globally in Nigeria, we have one of the lowest representation of women, but in Africa, we certainly have the lowest. And we all look up to Nigeria as a leader, as a giant, and I think, you know, leadership by example is what all African countries will strive for. So even from that point of view, it's really important that Nigeria invests in ensuring in a law. And I think the other thing we've also noted globally is that those countries that have done well are countries that have actually adopted legislation to guarantee a minimum representation of women in their parliaments and in decision making. And we don't have that in Nigeria.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask what should Nigeria be doing differently if we must get to this gender parity level. But first of all, maybe we should talk about what's actually responsible. You probably must have identified some of the barriers, some of the things that are militating against women climbing to that very level in society, particularly in Nigeria. What have you been able to identify?
So I think in Nigeria, as in many of our African countries, sometimes culture, tradition, interpretation of religious texts and so on are some of the factors that are used to hold women back. So culture plays a strong part in this. Of course, we're all products of our culture. We all embrace our culture and our traditions, but we also know that culture is dynamic. Culture is not static, and that at all times we need to be examining our culture and looking at the barriers or the elements of our cultural practices that may be negative to the advancement of the entire community. Sometimes we hide behind that, sometimes we hide behind religion. But I think we know that so let me take the issue of early marriage. So I'm starting from when a child is very young. We have a situation where over 40% of girls in this country get married before the age of 18. That's quite a lot of girls who don't have an opportunity to further their education so that they can actually be productive. When you have girls getting married at the age of 13, their bodies are not even fully developed at that time. There are all kinds of health consequences related to that. You're not developing the full potential of this human being to contribute to the society. So that right from the early stage, and one of the things that Beijing highlighted was also investment in the girl child. So we need to look at the barriers from the educational system, from the cultural and traditional factors that inhibit us. Violence is also a very important contributor to what holds women back as well. Cultural practices, but even domestic violence and so on, threats of violence, sexual harassment, all these things, all these factors that continue to hold women back. We also have situations where when women are also not educated, they don't have the best jobs. Most women are in the informal sector of the economy. And protection, social protection becomes an issue. They're more vulnerable to all forms of exploitation as well. So I think, and then poverty. Poverty has a feminine face, but that's also because that's also linked to the fact that when we don't invest in women being educated, they grow up to be the majority of those who are in the category of poor. So we need to look at the entire system from education to the health of women. We have a situation where every 10 minutes a woman in Nigeria dies in childbirth. Maternal mortality is still a very huge problem here. So whether it's in health, whether it's in education, whether it's in opportunities to participate in politics and decision making, we've seen that even when women are bold, they are educated, they're bold, they have money and they want to participate in these processes, they are still bullied out of the process. So there needs to be a mindset change on the part of our men to understand that bringing women into the decision-making space, empowerment of women generally, is actually to something that is beneficial to all of society. It's not women taking over men's roles. It's really we both sharing the responsibility to develop this country. And that mindset shift is key, and that is why we invest in programs such as He for She also, because we recognize that as much as we push, and even women push for their rights, We're not going to get that until the men also come and work side by side with us to bring about the necessary change.
Yeah, you spoke about the exploit of Rwanda. Part of the process was that they have to legislate this. And in Nigeria, we have not done that quite all right. But there's also this notion in Nigeria that power is not served a la carte. That if you need power, you have to go take it, you have to go grab it. Do you think you're going to see a situation whereby there will be legislation to that effect in Nigeria, or maybe the women just have to come mobilize themselves to get power?
I hope that's what we work to promote at the UN. I hope there will be legislation. But the path to getting that legislation may require different strategies. So there may be a need for women to mobilize and strengthen the demands, build broader alliances, alliances with men, with the young, with market women, with rural populations, mobilize the whole country really to be behind this need for legislation. But I do believe that it is possible. And the question is about what strategy. And I don't think there is one path necessarily. I think we need to look at the work that has to go on with the political actors, behind the scenes, the negotiations that has to go on. But there has to be the education of the public also, and that will include mobilizing everybody to be behind this call for legislation in Nigeria. And I believe that it is possible when people understand also what it is. What does having a gender bill, or whatever, or a bill that guarantees a certain representation of women, what does it take from you? What does it add to your situation? And I think that conversation, that education, for people to see that it's actually in their best interest and in the interest of the whole country to have a parliament that is more representative, to have a parliament where when they can see themselves and their issues and their needs in the representatives who they send to the states or national assemblies. And I think the country will be healthier and stronger for it, ultimately.
Yeah, do you think the women are communicating their message appropriately in terms of how they are driving it? Because some of our checks reveal that most of the men feel threatened when women keep talking about give us equality, give us this power.
Why should men feel threatened?
Well, you've talked about the cultural aspect of all of these things. So do you think the women are communicating their message more appropriately in such a way that they will gain the support of the men who need to concede this power to them?
See, the question you ask, maybe I want to also say that you're putting the burden of responsibility on women. And I don't believe that this is a women's issue. This is an issue for Nigeria, for the country. So women have to communicate the message. The government has to communicate the message because it's the government of Nigeria that has also committed at the highest level globally to do right by all of its citizens and give equal rights to all of its citizens. The men have to also, there are men who are progressive, who understand that this is not about women taking over. It's about widening the table so that more people can be around the table, so that the decisions we make will be more sustainable. The decisions we'll make will speak to the realities of everybody in society. Because as much as you may want to disagree, I don't think that a man can best speak for a woman in the rural community more than a woman. And of course, men can and do speak for women. But it is important that the voices of women are heard and that their realities and their perspectives also inform the decision making.
Yeah, I was saying that maybe you have to educate or inform or just let out some strategies perhaps what the UN has put in place to ensure that countries, nations, including Nigeria, are able to like walk that very path to ensure that this gender parity or equality we're talking about is achieved? Are there strategies being put in place? I know of the he for she, which is really catching up. I'm one of the he for she, and I'm sure there are millions of men out there. There are he for she. So what other strategies are you putting in place?
But what does it mean to be a he for she?
So you support the interest of the women.
Right. So there are many initiatives, obviously, that what we do as the UN is to support governments to translate these commitments that they make at the global level into national policies at the national level. And once they do, we provide technical support to the government. And then once they do that, to be able to report on it periodically. So that speaks to our normative mandate. And so in Nigeria, a lot of the work that we do around advocacy and technical support services is to say, okay, how is the government of Nigeria, which has ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, how is that being domesticated? The CEDAW committee in Geneva has asked Nigeria severally on the different reporting schedules of Nigeria to do this. The committee has asked Nigeria to adopt a gender bill. And every 4 years, Nigeria reports. Time that Nigeria reports, the picture is we still don't have a gender bill. We still haven't domesticated CEDAW. So there's a lot of work that we do, but it will happen when the government actually takes the decision to do that. So we definitely support, as the United Nations, the importance of legislation, because that also removes the element of a decision being at the whim of a politician who may be in power today, and if that particular politician decides, okay, I will allow X number of women to be in parliament, the next politician who comes will say, no, I'm not going to appoint women at all. But when we have legislation, it's enshrined in law. So that's one of the important strategies we support. We're also supporting an initiative called the Africa Women Leaders Network, AWLIN, which was launched, the Nigeria chapter was launched in July last year, and the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on the SDGs was a strong partner in the launch of that, and that network is also one of the tools that we are also using to help mobilize and galvanize women across different sectors to unite around common goals. So women in business, women in the educational sector, market women, women in science, women in politics, that we believe that the energy and the strength of women's mobilizing can also bring about change. So strategies like he for she, which also calls on men and men across sectors, traditional rulers, traditional leaders, men, religious leaders, men in the private sector, and so on, to say, this work is not just for women. For women, we need to make sure that we support mobilizing all women, but we also need to bring about more men. And then this Generation Equality campaign that we're running this year on the 25th anniversary is also an important strategy, because that's putting the emphasis on young people and young women. And it's saying that, 25 years ago, those women who went to Beijing are now much older. Yeah. We're today in 2020 talking about development challenges that we will be addressing over the next decade or two. Who is best placed to be at the forefront, at the helm of the discussions? And it's young people. So bringing more young women into the voice to say, look, take ownership of this. So whether we're talking about AWLIN, which is saying bring women in all of their diversity and their networks together, he for she, that is saying bring all of the men into the conversation, or Generation Equality. So these are all movement building initiatives, if you like, which we are also using, in addition to centrally working to support the government through the technical support services that we provide as the United Nations, to really move in the direction of legislation and then make monitoring and reporting on its commitments to women.
What exactly is the importance of the achievements of the gender goal in the overall SDGs?
So I think we are very pleased for to have a standalone goal on gender equality, because we believe that if we invest in achieving gender equality, we stand a higher level of success in achieving the other SDGs.
And that has been our episode on Agenda 2030 today. And we've been talking to the UN Women Country Representative to Nigeria and ECOWAS. And I do hope that you had a very great time listening to her. And until we come your way next time on Agenda 2030, I remain Desmond Utomen.